Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Total Attorneys Power Chat. We're thankful to have Jack Newton and David Dahl with us today. Jack Newton is the president and co-founder of Clio, and David Dahl is the chief technology officer here at Total Attorneys. Our topic today is security in the cloud, and this is a pretty popular topic. There are some great cost savings and advantages to moving your practice or pieces of your practice into the cloud, but is it safe? And just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. If you have any questions for the speakers, you're welcome to ask those inside of the questions pane of your GoToWebinar tool. If you have issues during the session, you can email powerchat@totalattorneys.com, and someone on our side will be able to help you. And Jack and David, before we get into today's session, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Jack, if you'd like, please go first.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for joining us. What we'll be talking about today is cloud computing security, making sure that you're addressing the relevant ethical points relating to cloud computing security, and that you understand the scope of security-related, backup-related, and data privacy-related questions that you want to be having addressed by a potential cloud computing provider.
Great, and David, you've been with Total Attorneys for some time now. What brings you to today's session?
Right, so I'm Chief Technology Officer, and I've been CTO here at Total Attorneys for about a year and a half, I guess. And in the year and a half that I've been here, we've done quite a bit of work on focusing on the SaaS platform quite a bit, which our first incarnation was an acquisition that we made about a year and a half ago of VLO Tech. And the learning that we got from that product and applying that to some new products that we're working on, we're very excited about. But also not just developing new products, but making sure that we're doing that in a way that's highly secure, highly scalable across the software, across the hardware, so the customers of our SaaS platform can be confident in how they use it and know that it's always available and their data is always available and secure. So that's what's been exciting from the technical perspective here at Total Attorneys, and I think we're going to touch on a number of those things in our conversation today.
Yes, we will, and let's go ahead and get started. We'll start off by talking about some of the fundamentals around cloud computing. We'll also cover ethics and pros and some concerns that you should be aware of as we get into later topics. First, starting with traditional computing, cloud computing, and software as a service. David, would you like to get started with these 3 points this morning?
Sure. I think these three bullet points, these topics are good to sort of set the stage and allow Jack and I to talk a little bit about what these phrases mean. Traditional computing, I think everybody's pretty familiar with the traditional computing model, and what we mean here is you buy a server or you buy a laptop, or maybe you have a number of servers and a number of laptops, and you buy those, maybe you lease those. They sit on site in your office. You might haul one back and forth from home and work, and you've got software that runs on there, and you've got customer information that sits on there. And there's some pros that we'll talk about briefly in a minute here, and there's some cons that we'll also talk about more. But basically, the traditional computing model, we're talking about one in which there's a physical computer sitting someplace where you can easily get your hands on it with your paid software, maybe your proprietary software, and customer information. Now, cloud computing and software as a service tend to, a lot of times they're used interchangeably, and for the most part, I think that's just fine. The media definitely uses those interchangeably, but specifically speaking, and I actually did a blog on this, a blog post probably a couple weeks ago, but strictly speaking, cloud computing is actually the tools and the platforms and the technology procedures and tricks that companies like toll attorneys and Clio and others use to develop software that's available in the cloud. Now, to put that in contrast or in perspective to the next phrase, software as a service, we build software on a cloud computing platform to allow us to make it available as software as a service. Software as a service is more of a go-to-market strategy than anything. And what's typical of software as a service is it's available any place you have a browser available. The pay model is typically pay to play or pay for performance. For us, on our typical SaaS platform, that's a monthly fee that's relatively easy to digest, or it is very easy to digest on a month-to-month basis. And for our prospect, our high-performance marketing product is based on the number of prospective clients that attorney customers receive. They pay a certain amount for each prospective client. So the payment's very focused on monthly recurring or sort of pay-to-play model. Jack, do you have anything that you want to add or underscore or correct?
I think one thing I always like to do when talking about cloud computing is to talk about some concrete examples of cloud computing as well, because a lot of the terminology is pretty technical, and what I think a lot of people are surprised by is just how much they might already be using cloud computing in their day-to-day lives. So, if you use a product like Gmail from Google or Hotmail from Microsoft, or even, do online banking with your bank, those are all examples of software as a service and cloud computing where your data is being hosted by a third party and you're accessing the software to interact with that data through a web browser. So, although cloud computing is maybe a bit of a new term and definitely, as you pointed out, a bit of a buzzword these days, cloud computing is already a pretty pervasive and widespread technology and is being used by, I think almost everyone that would be listening to this this Power Chat.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's innumerable B2C business to consumer applications, and there's more and more B2B applications that are popping up, such as Salesforce.com, which I guess hasn't just popped up, but it's one of the poster children that I held up for successful B2B cloud-based solutions. So yeah, these are out there, and the trend is the tide's rolling, where more and more solutions are offered via the web and traditional SaaS model than are emerging in the sort of the shrink wrap traditional computing model.
And with all new technologies, there's always some concern, especially if that solution surrounds a service or a practice that's regulated. Let's talk a little bit about ethics. And Jack, I think you have quite a bit of experience in this area, and we'll hand this off to you.
Sure. So I think, with respect to the ethics in cloud computing, there's been a lot of advancement in the discussion around cloud computing and its relative acceptability as a platform for lawyers to use over the past 2 or 3 years. And I think it's a really exciting period for lawyers to be in with the emergence of a new technology like this. But as with any new technology, there's some trepidation, especially on the part of bar associations around whether the technology is suitable for confidential client, for storing confidential client data and so on. So there's, in terms of the ethics rulings that we've seen to date, there's the positive ruling in Arizona relating not specifically to cloud computing, but to the storage of documents in an online file storage or file backup service. and the State Bar of Arizona deemed that to be acceptable. There's a proposed formal ethics opinion from the North Carolina State Bar that indicates that cloud computing is acceptable and within the rules of professional conduct. And most recently, the ABA's Ethics 2020 Commission is examining cloud computing and the ethical implications of cloud computing, and is actually requesting comments from both lawyers and vendors about their thoughts on cloud computing, and has requested responses by, I believe, December 15th. So I would encourage anyone that's listening that has a stake in cloud computing or is interested in giving the Commission feedback on cloud computing to get back to the Ethics Commission, since they do really want to hear from practicing lawyers about how they view cloud computing and their ethical obligations as it relates to cloud computing. But at the end of the day, I think what many of the ethics opinions that are coming out are saying and will say is that cloud computing is just a new technological instance of something that's been happening for as long as the profession of lawyering has been around, and that's trusting a third party with confidential client data. So whether you're storing confidential client documents at an off-site document storage facility run by, say, Iron Mountain, or trusting a third-party copier service to duplicate documents. Interestingly, the State Bar of Texas actually pointed to third-party copier services as one of the precedents that relate to cloud computing ethics and so on. So I think what we're seeing with cloud computing is really just another technological instance of lawyers having to trust a third party with confidential client data. And as with all the other instances of trusting third parties, an appropriate amount of due diligence needs to be performed, and you need to make sure that you're asking the right kinds of questions. And that's something David and I will go over the remainder of this presentation. What kinds of questions should you be asking? But really, the bar associations are putting the onus on the attorneys, saying, cloud computing is an acceptable way to run your law practice, is an acceptable way to store confidential client data, but you need to make sure you're undertaking a reasonable amount of due diligence to ensure that client confidentiality is being maintained. Do you have anything to add to that, David?
I think you covered a lot of that. Covered all my thoughts really well. The only thing I think I'd like to add is that some of the things that Toll Attorneys is working on and actually working in concert with Clio and Rocket Matter and some others is to provide guidance to specifically the ABA under the ABA Ethics 2020 Commission is helping the ABA understand that the ABA should look to experts such as Clio, Toll Attorneys, and others that are working together to help add transparency to cloud computing. So not only does the ABA need to be experts in the most cutting-edge technology, but attorneys that are interested in using cloud computing or SaaS applications, they also don't need to be experts in it. You don't have to be an expert in understanding how a car runs to make the right purchase, but you do need to know the right questions to ask when you're looking at buying a new car. And those are that's the kind of guidance that we're hoping that the ABA will respond to, and actually we're going to touch on a lot of that guidance later on in this conversation.
And let's talk about some of the benefits of traditional computing and then some of the concerns around traditional computing, as many of our listeners may be evaluating that transition right now. And Dave, do you want to go ahead and get started on these points, the physical control, ability to update and one-time fees rather than recurring?
Sure. So in traditional computing, the pros are quite often thought of as, you have you have physical control of your hardware, your software, your data, and if there's any concern about updating any of that hardware or software, you can do that at your own pace because it is under your own control. And the last point here, one-time fee rather than recurring fee, that's more or less true. A lot of times there's some hidden costs to the traditional / physical computing model, which we'll talk about in the cons section. But there's a lot of times a sense of security and a sense of control that users of traditional computing have. Now, as far as the cons are concerned in traditional computing model, a lot of those cons are sort of the flip side of the coin, the same coin that we listed under the pros of traditional computing. And sure, you have physical access and everything's stored in one place, but that also tends to mean that people in your office could have easy access to that data, that information. People, the maintenance staff in the office, or the person that takes out the garbage and waters the plants at night, they have access to that as well. And I mentioned that there's oftentimes considered to be one-time fees in the traditional computing model. Well, sometimes that gets a little bit blurry, and those fees crop up again when you need to install updates. Oftentimes there's a fee associated with that. If you have warranty on your hardware, you have to maintain your warranty with additional fees quite often. If there's hardware failure, there's obviously fees incorporated in that, and you need to maintain that software and the hardware. You need to call the proverbial IT guy, whether that's a staff person that you need to maintain, or whether it's a relationship that you've created that somebody comes in as needed to take care of those issues. That person needs to come in, and there's costs associated with that as well. So that's a little bit on pros and cons. Jack, did I miss anything good there?
No, I don't think you missed anything, David. I agree with all of those points, and I think you did a great job of summarizing the relative pros and cons.
Now, there are a lot of administrative benefits to cloud computing, not just the reduction of overhead costs or the pay-as-you-go model, but also seamless upgrades, ease of use, and ongoing customer service. Jack, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in these areas supporting your Clio users?
Yeah, well, I think that what most people respond really positively to with the cloud computing model is the fact that it's just so painless to get up and running, and it's painless in a wide variety of ways. People that are used to the pain points associated with traditional client-server installations and software are used to very expensive or very large upfront costs. So the cost of licensing the software is often very significant, usually into the thousands or sometimes even the tens of thousands of dollars in software licenses alone. There's also capital costs that have to go into a traditional desktop solution, like buying servers and hardware. And again, that can easily reach into the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to get up and running. So with cloud computing, when almost universally it's just a simple monthly fee that needs to start being paid, it's just such a benefit, both in terms of reduction of upfront costs and reduction of overhead or month-to-month costs on an ongoing basis as well. So from a cash flow perspective, which is especially important for new attorneys, they're able to keep their monthly cost basis very, very low and not have to make any large upfront investments. Also, we've all had, those of us that have had to deal with, legacy software upgrades where you're having to upgrade, for example, Microsoft Exchange Server from one version to another, know that this can be a really lengthy process. It involves a lot of planning It can be a very painful process if anything goes wrong. And with software as a service, again, you're receiving upgrades deployed to your account on the provider's coin, and on they're the ones making the time investment. So you just log into your account on a Monday morning, for example, and you've got you know, a whole bunch of new features, maybe some bug fixes that were rolled out, all without you having to intervene or do anything. So I think this is another you know, huge advantage for, again, solos and small firms that maybe don't have a dedicated IT guy to, you know, roll out and install software updates. These are all being taken care of for you. This ease of use over multiple platforms, I think, is another really important point as well, and really that touches on the fact that we're seeing an increased use of both Macs and mobile devices, from the iPhone to the iPad, as well as Android-based devices and Blackberries and Palm Pres and so on. Cloud computing lets you get to your data from all of these devices. So whether you're a Windows user or a Mac user, or if you're on the road and want to get to your data from your mobile device, most cloud computing providers offer fairly seamless mobile interfaces or even mobile applications to tap into your data from these devices. So I think this is another huge benefit of cloud computing, and as Lorien goes increasingly mobile, this, I think, will be one of the primary advantages of cloud computing over traditional desktop platforms. And finally, ongoing customer service, I think that one of the most important things about software as a service is the fact that from a consumer's perspective, you're really empowered in the sense that you have agreed to license the software on a subscription basis, and you're really only obligated to use the software as long as you're getting value out of the software and as long as the software provider is giving you good customer support. So we've all heard the stories of software companies that have, or we've all probably directly experienced buying a piece of software with the hopes of installing it and running it and getting up and running with it, but just kind of leaving it on the shelf. And there's actually a term called shelfware for software like that gets bought and just left collecting dust on the shelf because you never actually install and use it. And that's a sunk cost, obviously. With software as a service, you only pay for the software if you're using it and as long as you're using it. And it provides a huge motivator for companies like Clio and Total Attorneys and other SaaS companies to continue developing and improving and iterating on their products, because if they don't, the customers are, you know, basically free to leave to a service that's evolving at a faster pace for providing better customer service. So this is a big benefit from a consumer's perspective as compared to the traditional software model. So those are some of my thoughts. David, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to underscore the last one about customer service. And I don't think we can stress that enough. Where the typical SaaS B2B vendor like Clio or Total Attorneys, we have people on staff whose job is to take phone calls from existing customers, and there's a first name basis there. They'll recognize you when you call, and it's a customer's hard line into the company, whether they need help getting their account set up, whether they have questions about new features, or whatever the topic or question is under the sun. You know, we've got typical SaaS companies have people on staff that take those calls. You know, and if you have a hang up with Outlook, you can call Microsoft, but I'm betting they probably won't know what your first name is.
Great point. And let's talk a little bit about security in the cloud. That's definitely a question that I know we hear from our potential customers before they purchase, as they're evaluating moving their practice into the cloud. Is it secure? Do you do security audits? What is the encryption level? Where is my data actually stored? And Jack, you want to tell us a little bit about how you handle these questions when you're asked by your customers, or how you would approach these specific situations?
Yeah, so when we're asked about this question about the security of Clio and cloud computing in general, usually what we start off with saying sounds kind of audacious, but it's really quite true, and that's that with cloud computing security, you're probably getting better security than you'd be able to get if you're trying to do it on your own with an on-premise solution. And I think that's true only because of the economies of scale that are at play with cloud computing, and the fact that when Clio, for example, is hosting data for thousands of attorneys, we're able to invest in a security infrastructure that any attorney on their own wouldn't be able to afford. So those are things like geographic redundancy, and geographic redundancy simply means that your data and servers are distributed in a geographically redundant fashion, so that if there's one data center located in, say, California that suffers an outage, that there's an automatic failover to a data center, say in Denver, that isn't suffering from an outage. This also helps prevent against potential data destruction. So if there's a natural disaster or some other kind of catastrophic data loss at one data center, there's always another data center to fall back on with that geographic redundancy. The SaaS provider, the backup routines we have in place, we back up data multiple times per day, 4 times per day actually. So this means that it's very easy to get a point-in-time recovery of your backups and to replay backups to the point of the data failure based on that backup strategy. And if you talk to most solos or small firms, they're lucky if they're backing up data on a daily basis, or in some cases even a weekly basis. So to have a continual backup of the data, again, I think is something above and beyond what most solos and small firms would be able to do. Regular security audits are another thing that us and most other legal SaaS providers undertake. So we actually have a daily security audit done by a company called McAfee Secure that does a full security audit on our external website and scans it for a wide variety of known exploits on a daily basis. So if there's, for example, a hack that a malicious hacker might try to exploit to get access to Clio servers, McAfee knows about that. They've actually encoded that test into an automatic scan and will alert us if there's any security vulnerabilities that are discovered as part of that automatic scan. The data centers that we store data in are world-class data centers, so they're SAS 70 Type 2 certified data centers. So this is an auditing standard that makes sure that there's appropriate policies and controls in place relating to who has physical access to the servers and so on. And they're Tier 4 data centers, which means that virtually every type of redundancy you can imagine, from the network connection to the power grid to the power supplies in the actual servers, have some kind of redundant failover, so that there's never a single point of failure that could bring the data center down. And most importantly, I think as it relates to client confidentiality, there's end-to-end encryption for Clio and most other legal SaaS providers' software platforms as well. So you can be accessing the data with the SaaS provider from a Starbucks, Wi-Fi connection that you're sharing with others, or from your mobile device, or from your desktop computer. And you can be assured that all the communications between your computer and that remote computer are encrypted using the same kind of encryption that you would use for a bank transaction. So when you take all of these factors together, I think it's very clear that cloud computing offers a level of security that at the very minimum is equal to, and in many cases far surpasses, the security of a traditional on-premise solution. David, anything to add to that, or anything you'd like to elaborate on with these points?
I think, excuse me, I think it was great. I mean, there's a number of benefits of cloud computing over traditional, but just to tie a couple of things together that we've already spoken about, that the cloud computing technologies that Clio and Toll Attorneys uses allows us to provide these kind of specific security benefits to all of our customers and still offer it at a fantastic price point because we can get those economies of scale and because those technologies can be leveraged across multiple customers, whether we're multi-tenancy or not, which is a whole other topic. But basically, you know, we're able to provide those kind of benefits across all of our customers thanks to the cloud computing technologies and offering it as software as a service.
Thanks, David. So now let's get into questions. How do I find the right SaaS provider for me or my office? There are a number of questions that you should consider and ask the potential vendor you may be working with before purchasing a software as a service solution. The first of which is ultimately attorneys should educate themselves and ask the right questions when choosing a vendor. But what around security framework, or what are some of those questions that they should begin the conversation with? David, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So as I mentioned beforehand, it's not important to understand. I mean, it's fantastic if you understand how cloud computing and software as a service works. But to use my metaphor from before, it's not important to understand how a transmission works before you buy a car. But there's obvious questions that you want obvious questions and conversations you want to have before you actually take that leap. And that's this part of this presentation is what are those kind of questions. So it's a great opportunity to take notes and think about the relationships that you have with your vendors or the potential relationships you're evaluating. Now, from a security point of view, we touched on a lot of really meaty, interesting security topics in the last conversation with respect to geographic redundancy and backups, the type of data center. But a terrific way for starting that conversation is to just ask, very generally speaking, about the vendor's approach to security and how do they think about security, meaning what type of people are in what roles, what are the different levels of security. That's the second bullet point here is the 4 different levels that at least that Toll Attorneys thinks about their security model with respect to access to the physical layer, that access being, you know, who literally guards the computers. These top tier level 4 data centers, they have dedicated security personnel and they have procedures that they go through, typically, or not typically, but always involving biometric scans and checklists and pre-announced guests to make sure that only the authorized personnel have physical access to the computers themselves. And then how do you address network security and how do you apply network updates? And same goes true for the software layer and the database layer. How do you make sure that your proprietary custom software, as well as the third-party software embedded within your solution, doesn't have security vulnerabilities? And then finally, how do you make sure that your database itself is secure and stays up to date? All 4 of those different layers have different challenges that need to be addressed on a regular constant basis.
Jack, anything to add on security framework?
No, I think David did a great job of outlining the 4 major tiers of security you have to be concerned about.
Okay, and the next set of questions is around the data center, where your data will actually call home. What do they specialize in? Is the data center located off-site? Do they have built-in redundancy to ensure power, cooling, and data backups? And is physical access to the data center secured? David, any additional questions that they should be mindful of here?
Yeah, you know, in a prior conversation that Jack and I had, I'll steal his bullet point that he added in a conversation we had previously about this, and that is just to step back a second and put data centers in context to the cloud. Now, just because data lives in the cloud and because we all use Gmail, Facebook, Salesforce.com, that software that is presented to us through the cloud does actually live somewhere. There is a physical presence for that, and that's where these data centers come into play, where companies like Toll Attorneys and Clio and others, we have physical presence in data centers where there's stacked computers and all kinds of wiring and blinking lights, and it's noisy and cold, for the sake of providing that through the cloud on a 24/7 kind of basis. Now, when you talk to vendors, sure, like us, they might also present themselves in the cloud, but you want to understand where their physical presence is. They may not get into detail about who their data center vendor is, and that can be okay as long as they answer other questions appropriately. But you know, one of the big questions to ask is, do they manage their own data center versus use a third-party data center? Years ago, there was an overbuilding that just very closely trailed the first .com bust. Data centers were radically overbuilt, and they had their own bust that took place. And a lot of companies learned a heck of a lot about how to manage a data center effectively. So what we benefit from now is that there's a whole host of top-tier level 4 data centers available for companies like Clio and Toll Attorneys to use, to outsource and use as a way of more cost-effectively handling the physical security, handling a lot of the redundant power, the redundant network connectivity to the cloud, for handling the redundant diesel generators that these facilities have. They can do it on a much more cost-effective basis than Toll Attorneys can. Now, if you look at the other end of the spectrum from the size perspective, there's been a lot of interesting conversations going on about Google and now Facebook. Those sizes of organizations, they actually have the economies of scales where it actually makes more sense for them to physically create these large data centers to house their physical infrastructure, and it makes total sense for them to do that. But the other 95% of SaaS players, if they're handling their own data center, you should ask a lot of questions about that, because it's really hard to provide those security benefits of cloud computing that we talked about earlier and do it in a cost-effective manner unless you're using one of these top tier 4 level data centers.
Great, and the next slide is data backup and portability. These 4 questions surround how often they're backing up your data, where is that data stored, what is the recovery process or last date of recovery that you can retrieve your data from. And Jack, can you talk us through these 4 questions, giving us a little bit more detail about why customers may want to ask this type of information from their vendor?
Yeah, so I think that when the questions relating to data backup, the reason you're concerned about asking these questions as a customer is you want to make sure that your cloud computing vendor has thought through these questions, and you want to make sure you've got a good understanding of what the worst case scenario in terms of data loss could be. And again, although cloud computing is a new term and a new technology in some ways. The concepts around backup as it relates to your cloud computing provider backups are really the same kind of issues you face with backups as an individual. And the same kind of risks and compromises exist as well. So if you only do backups once a day, say you have an automated backup to, if you're backing up to a CD-ROM at the end of every day, for example, you know that if a data failure happens just before you've completed that backup, you've potentially lost a full day's worth of data because you've only done that backup on a daily basis. The same goes for your cloud computing providers. So you want to ask how frequently are they backing up their data, and if it's only, for example, on a daily basis, you're potentially exposed to a full day's worth of data loss if they should happen to have a failure at the end of a work day and they only had done the backups the previous night. A backup strategy that is used to address this particular weakness sometimes is a backup strategy called doing incremental backups. So you do a full backup on a regular basis. So that's a backup of everything on the cloud computing provider storage system. And then they do incremental backups throughout the day, either on an hourly basis or even in a real-time basis, so that if there is some kind of data loss or a catastrophic data failure, it's possible to recover the data up to the point in time that it was lost. So that's a really important aspect of data backups is doing continual and incremental backups. You also want to make sure that they store backups off-site, and this goes back to our earlier point around the data recovery process and what should happen if there's a large catastrophic data failure at one physical location. You want to make sure that there's backups distributed over a variety of geographically dispersed locations. Another really important point to ask the provider is if there's either been a historical need to restore from data, so have they had a catastrophic data failure where they've had to restore from their backups, and even if there hasn't been such a scenario, do they routinely practice their data recovery procedures? And the reason this is important, and again, this is important to do for your own personal backups as well, is that there's so many cases of people thinking that they're backing up their data, and they only discover that they're not properly backing up their data, or they haven't backed up what they think they're backing up when it comes time to do a recovery. So, excuse me, this is a very important point to cover, is to make sure that there's a routine kind of fire drill basically for the data recovery procedures, and that they are able to bring their system back up from scratch in the event of a data loss. And this final point relates to making sure you can do your own backups of the cloud computing provider's data, of your data that's being stored with a cloud computing provider. And this is really critical just because if you want to ensure that you have the flexibility to move your data to another service if you become unhappy with a service or with your current service, you're able to export your data and potentially migrate it to an additional service. But you also want to make sure that you're able to get your data out just to support other workflows that you might want to undertake. So whether that's doing something as simple as a mail merge, you want to make sure you can export your contacts easily from the cloud computing provider as well. So this sounds like something you might expect to be always available, but there's some providers that make it very difficult to get your data out of the service because they know that making it difficult to get your data out kind of traps you with the service. So be very wary of providers that don't make it easy to get your data out, and make this part of your standard due diligence, is verifying that it's possible for you to get your own data out of the service easily and efficiently in an open data standard that you could easily bring to another service provider. Anything else you'd like to elaborate on here, David?
No, I think that was all right, spot on.
Let's talk a little bit about corporate viability. Referring to one of David's earlier points when he gave the example of the .com bust, corporate viability is a concern that all people transitioning to a vendor, whether it be a SaaS vendor or an on-premise vendor, should consider when they go through their evaluation. And David, do you want to expand a little bit on corporate viability?
Sure. So, like I mentioned previously, these kind of questions, it might sort of feel uncomfortable to ask a company or ask a sales rep. These kind of questions absolutely should be asked. The person that you're working with, sales rep or whomever, they may hesitate to ask some. They may not feel comfortable, for example, talking about how this slightly new, this emerging company is funded. But that's okay. The question needs to be asked, and they may have very clear reasons why they're hesitant to ask, or they talk in generalities. But you need to do your best to get this kind of information from them, and specifically for companies that are not public, where there's quite a bit more information that you can glean publicly. But for example, like the slide says, how long has the company been in business? How are they held and funded? That tells a lot about what stage of growth they're in. The number of customers that they have and the type of customers that they cater to. I mean, what you want to hear is, and how many customers they have. Ask a question, you'll get a very large round number, but that's okay. But what's even more interesting is having them describe what their ideal customer looks like. And what you want to hear is a description of a customer that matches you very closely. Then as a follow-on to that, the product roadmap. What we mean by product roadmap, that might be a bit jargony, but product roadmap is simply the features that they have, what's coming up next, what's going to be improved upon, what is a new area in which they're going to start adding features. And similar to the point about the ideal customer, what's ideal here is you want to hear first of all, effort being put into increasing, refining the functionality, making it more and more valuable to yourself, to you. But also you want to hear things that resonate with challenges you're having today, that so you feel more comfortable that their product vision and direction is aligned with what your needs are today and in the future.
Jack, anything to add on corporate viability?
I think the only thing I'd add to corporate viability is to make sure you're looking at selecting your cloud computing provider as a long-term partner in your business's success, and you'll be working with this vendor for potentially a very long time. If you're selecting, for example, a cloud computing provider of a practice management software, this is the kind of software that you would use potentially for the entire lifetime of your law office. So you're talking about a relationship that will last a minimum of years and potentially decades. So that's why I think the points that David pointed out here are so important. They're not necessarily and if you're explaining why you're asking these questions to the cloud computing provider, they may sound like kind of intrusive questions, I guess, and many business owners wouldn't be comfortable answering all of these questions. But the reason you need to get a firm sense of at least some of these questions is that you want to make sure that this provider is in the game for the long run, and that they're not a fly-by-night operation, and they're not somebody that's going to give a kick at the can and quit in 6 months if it doesn't work out. So look at it as a long-term strategic partnership more than a traditional kind of transitory software purchase. This is the reason it's so important to ask the questions that David's outlined here, and to make sure that there's a relationship that can be built upon there. And asking about the product roadmap also helps I'll just build on that point in that you want to be clear with the vendor that you'd like to build a close relationship here and have a good sense of where their company and where their product is heading, and to provide as much feedback and influence on that roadmap as well. And I think one thing you see among cloud computing vendors is a real willingness to listen to their customers and shape their product based on what their customers want to see in the product. So when you're asking about that product roadmap, don't just listen, but also give feedback on what you'd like to see the product roadmap to be, and see what level of receptiveness you have from the vendor, and whether it seems like they're really listening to you and what you'd like to see. And that might be a good indicator of how they'll be to work with in the future when you do run into features or enhancements you'd like to see made to the software.
And that's a great point, Jack. I think one of the key differences between a true SaaS provider and an on-premise solution is that one of the development characteristics is that along the development cycle of any of our products, we're constantly giving ourselves an opening or an opportunity to inject that customer feedback. And it really is more of a partnership than a traditional vendor relationship when you work with a SaaS provider or a SaaS solution, especially one of the four of us in the legal space, whether it be Rocket Matter or Clio, Total Attorneys, or Direct Law. I think all of us are very open to listening to that feedback and making sure that it's included in the way we build our products.
Chelsea, speaking from experience there, her real job is she's one of our head product owners here at Total Attorneys, so she has a lot of experience there.
I think, just elaborating on that point, Chelsea, I think one of the things that separates SaaS from traditional software isn't so much the willingness to listen. I think even, traditional software vendors still listen to their customers, but it's the length of the feedback cycle. With traditional software, they're on yearly or bi-yearly release schedules. So even if you have your pet feature adopted by the SaaS or by the traditional software vendor, you might be waiting 2 years to see that. And as you guys know, you can roll out an update to the software sometimes in a real-time basis and incorporate some of these feedback that was only received maybe the day before. And I think that's where you really help cement a relationship with the vendor.
Absolutely. And the last set of questions before we recap today's session is confidentiality and privacy. What are their terms of service and privacy policies, and do they meet your expectations? Jack, what's your input on these two questions?
Sorry, Chelsea, I just had a bit of a coughing fit there and put myself on mute. But I think that with confidentiality and privacy policies, these are long and typically boring legal documents to read, but I guess out of all the potential audiences that should be reading and understanding these agreements, it is the legal community. So when you're signing up for these services, make sure you read and understand the terms of service and privacy policies outlined by the companies, and make sure that they're agreeable to you. So look at the terms of service, which will outline basically a set of expectations that you can have of the service provider, potentially in terms of uptime, reliability, and so on. And they also lay out expectations of you. So, for example, maybe some caps or limits on what kinds of things you can do with the service, maybe maximum data transfers per month, and so on. And normally these are limits that you don't have to be concerned with. They're limits that are in place to protect against abuse, but they're limits you should be aware of at least, and make sure that you agree with them. And the privacy policies, for a paid service, I don't think you usually need to worry about the privacy policies too much. What you want to see in the privacy policy is a clear statement saying that data uploaded to the service is owned by you and will not be used by the cloud computing provider for any other purpose other than delivering you the service you've subscribed to, so that they can't, for example, repurpose or resell a contact list that you upload to the service. And again, this isn't something you would ever see with a paid service, but it's something you need to be worried about with free services, because I've become fond of saying that with free services, the product being sold is usually you. They're letting you into the service for free, but trying to reuse or repurpose your data in some way that they can gain financial benefit from it. So whether it's mint.com selling your financial data and selling specific financial services to you based on your financial profile, whether it's Facebook targeting ads based on your friend networks and your likes and dislikes. These are things you need to be aware of and things you should be making privacy-related decisions around, making sure you understand those policies.
Great, and to recap today's session, some final points. You're already in the cloud. It's not something scary or new to you. Security is better than email, which is deemed to be private and a reasonable expectation of privacy. Security, data availability, and data protection of cloud computing is often superior to on-premise alternatives. And any additional items that you'd like to add as we wrap up today's session, Jack or Dave?
The only thing that I would like to add is that you don't. I've said it a couple of times, and I'll say it again. You don't need to be experts in cloud computing or SaaS technologies to feel comfortable with them. Just make sure that you ask your prospective vendor the appropriate questions. You read through the confidentiality, privacy, and terms of service to make sure that they're handling your sensitive information appropriately, and you should be in a perfect position to take advantage of those kind of vendors.
Jack, any additional
points?
Yeah,
I agree. I think that the main driving point I guess we've been making through this whole presentation is to make sure you do your due diligence and just make sure that you've done your research and that you've selected a vendor based on some of the criteria we've outlined in this presentation, and there's really no way you can go wrong if you've adhered to some of the points we've outlined here.
Great, and thank you both for joining us this week for the Total Attorneys Power Chat. All of our attendees will receive a follow-up email that will include contact information for both of our hosts, a link to watch this presentation again, and an optional survey. Jack, thanks again. We do encourage everybody to check out Clio at www.growclio.com. And Dave, thank you so much for your time. You can check out the Total Attorneys SaaS application at totalattorneys.com. Thank you both, and we wish everybody a great Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Chelsea. It's good talking again, Jack.
Thank you both as well. Enjoyed being here.
Thanks. Have a great holiday, everyone.